Hello everyone, welcome to this month's edition of Webinar Wednesday. My name is Jaylene Ippolito. I'll be moderating today's session. Today we have our Relationship Manager, Rob Peterson-Wakeman, and he's going to walk you through how to manage your SAP users. If you have questions at any point, just type them into the questions panel on the right side of your screen, and we'll give Rob a chance to answer those at the end. Rob, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jaylene. Thanks everybody for attending today's webinar. As Jaylene said, don't hesitate to ask questions in the question area, and we'll probably take those questions towards the end. So today's session is how to manage your SAP users. Some of you might already be doing this, but I thought I would go through the areas that you are responsible for managing users and licenses and authorizations in the system, so that if you're not familiar with them, you can gain some familiarity, and if you are familiar with them, maybe you might even pick up some tips or some tricks today. So we'll talk about the areas in general, and then we'll get a little bit more specific. So really today we're talking about the creation, the managing of users on your SAP Business One system. There's really a few steps that you have to keep in mind. So we have to create a user profile in the system first, then we have to assign a license, and then we have to assign user authorizations. And the reason that these three steps sort of make sense is because there is three separate windows that we have to go into to do these things. Why are these things different? Well, there actually can be a profile for a user on the system that, for maybe an individual that is just receiving data from the system that doesn't actually log into SAP. So that's why user creation and license assignment are not necessarily one and the same. Also, you may have profiles for users that are no longer with your company, or somebody that is gone on vacation for a couple of weeks or a month, and you need to keep their user profile separate from the temporary person who's filling for them. But they would probably use the same license. That is to say, if Jaylene takes vacation for a few weeks and I'm filling in for her and I'm not normally on SAP, her license could be reassigned to me for a brief period, and then it could be given back to her after she's back from vacation and I'm no longer temping. Then of course you need to assign what level of authorization folks have on the system. And I know in some companies this is fairly simple. Maybe you've got all or no authorization to certain things, but we'll talk a little bit about the levels of authorization that you can set in the system and how those things can be managed a little more easily. All right. So the first bit on user creation. So where we find the user setup menu, and I typically prefer to go by the drop-down menu items on the top, but you could just as easily hit the modules button in your Business One and go there too, and we'll show you that in a sec. But really where you're going is to the administration module, setup, general, and then the users tab. Okay, so let's take a look at that in an actual system. All right, so here we have Business One in front of us. And like I was saying, you can find these things by going through the side main menu bar, kind of off to the left-hand side if that's where you've got it. And I could go to Administration, Setup, General, and then it's going to be this Users tab here. And then of course I can also get at it through the drop-down menus in the top. General Users. So we'll call that up. All right, so this is a form of master data. That is to say that you're presented sort of with the user's profile screen, and then as you notice, the green buttons for scrolling through the various cards of the user setup screen. The green buttons are active, so we can kind of go to the first one, second one, and you'll sometimes notice that there are users set up to run various services in SAP. You can see there's an alert services user. These are some of the things that might have been set up as part of the installation or set up by your consultant to run certain things, and that's why those profiles exist. But if we want to find a user card, we could hit the binocular key, and then we could search for, let's say, the manager user using the manager user code. And then there you go. That's the manager user profile that's I'm currently logged in as on this Business One system. So let's say we want to create a new one. We would go to the Add button up here next to the binocular button, and we click Add. And we wanted to create one for Jaylene. So the user code is the typically the smaller, more abbreviated kind of name that you give a user. This is the login name for SAP. So similar to what's in an email address, you know, the handle on the left side of the @ symbol, you'll typically use some sort of abbreviated version of the person's name for the user code. So, you know, maybe it's Jaylene I, Jaylene. All right. Binding with a Microsoft account, this is only if you use single sign-on. So I don't know if anyone out there is using this, but you do have the ability to do single sign-on, and that is to say, when you log into Windows with your Windows profile information, you can also make it so that Business One uses that initial Windows login and logs you into Business One with that profile. But that would be a subject for another day. All right, so we've got the Jaylene's user code, and then we would typically type her full name. And correct me, Jaylene, if I'm misspelling your name. I think we're so far so good. You also have the ability to link it to an employee. So when we click Add on this, it will actually also ask us if we want to set up an employee card at the same time. So we're not going to set up an employee card for Jaylene at this time, but if we had an employee card for Jaylene, and what by employee card I mean the employee record card that's in the Human Resources module. So Human Resources, Employee Master Data. If you're using this module for some reason, and for some of you, you do use this module, if it's part of a job management or project management system, you may need to set up this profile information. We could set up an employee master data card for Jaylene. If you're not using this module, it's possible that there's really no applicability here, but you can use this user card to kind of more deeply define an employee's HR information. Okay, so that link is there. We'll leave it unlinked for now. So here's where we set up the email address for the individual. Now, if Jaylene wasn't even an SAP user, like let's say the CEO or one of the shareholders of our company wanted to receive alerts from SAP Business One, but was not a licensed user in SAP, that's actually possible. So if the CEO of your company came to you and said, hey, I wouldn't mind receiving this alert on a daily basis, what you would do is you'd come in and set them up a user card like this. You just wouldn't go to the next 2 steps of assigning them a license and giving them authorizations, but you'd have to set up a user profile. And then of course you would use the query and alert system to set up that alert that the person would receive on a daily or frequent basis. Okay, so that's another use of this user card, or actually for non-SAP users that would like to receive an alert from the system. So we can put a mobile phone number. This mobile device ID is important if you're using the Business One mobile app. There'll typically be a long character string device ID that needs to be plugged in here in order for the Business One mobile app to work. Don't know if anybody is still using fax number, but of course a user can have their own fax number. There is a default system that specify defaults that can be attributed to a user. We're not going to cover that today, but essentially we can actually set up kind of sets of user defaults like languages and address that are used, defaults as far as kind of like color and font face and all that kind of good stuff. And we can have more than one profile of user defaults in the system. So this is probably a good topic for another day, the user default system. But if you have defaults for certain user groups, you can kind of tag the default group that Jaylene would be using here. We can also talk about what branch and what department Jaylene is in. Again, some of you might be using this, others maybe not so much. And here's another field that came, I think, in about version 9.1 or 9.2, but it's the idea of authorization groups. So when we go to the third step of this tutorial today, we're actually going to see a new feature within general authorizations called authorization groups. And here's where we can actually assign Jaylene to an authorization group. So instead of just having individual profiles for authorization level, we can actually set up authorization levels for inventory people or purchasing people or salespeople. And these group names are user defined. So you can give the group whatever name you want. We'll show this to you in the third step. But here's where we would define what authorization groups Jaylene participates in. We could also set a language here. So just a heads up on this, if you set the language to French, the first time Jaylene logs in, she's likely going to see Business One, but she's going to see it en français. So you can actually change the language that the labels and descriptions that Business One comes in, and that's how that would be controlled right there. I think there's 23 of these, if I'm not mistaken. We won't count them right now. Now the password, you can notice that there's a temporary password set up. Nobody knows what this password is. So you have to actually create a new temporary welcome password for the user right here. So, I'll typically use something like welcome with a capital W or whatever super secret introductory password, maybe an exclamation point. It's never a bad idea to use at least one capital letter and one special character in your welcome password. And of course, because the welcome password is something that you'll probably use the same all the time, but you want the user to actually change the password at next login. So what you're essentially doing is you're creating a temporary welcome password that will only be used once for the user to log in. And as long as this flag is checked, then they'll be prompted to put user-specific unique password in upon next login. If you would like it so that users' passwords never expire, you can check this box. And if that box is unchecked, then once ever so often, passwords will, users will be prompted to put a new password into the system. The last box here, you can notice, is the lock box. So if a user goes away from your company, either planned or unplanned, or even for a period of time, and you want to lock their profile down so that it can't be used either for a term or indefinitely, we can select this locked box, and the user profile essentially becomes inactive. So it's okay to kind of back out of this at this point and not create the card, but once user cards have been created and used for a time, we don't really have the option to delete them, but we do have the option to lock them, which means that they're not available anymore. Of course, the other way to lock an account would simply be to change the password and not tell anybody what you changed the password to. The last two flags here, the super user flag at the top and the mobile user flag. So the super user flag is ticked for individuals that are sort of the administrators in the system, and it allows them to do just a few things that not everybody can do, like high-level setup stuff, like this kind of thing, like creating users on the system. And we won't talk about this particular setting today. The one that popped up, you can see when I selected super user, there was another option that popped up. Again, I'm not prepared to cover kind of the integration scenario packages today, but potentially for a future webinar. Okay, so if Jaylene was a super user, we would click that flag. And again, also if she's using the Business One mobile application for iPhone or Android, then you'd check this box here. And then of course you'd have to have the mobile device ID filled out. So we're just gonna create Jaylene's profile user. We're gonna click add on the system, and away you go. And if we are searching for Jaylene again, we should be able to find her by clicking on the binoculars and coming back to the user card. Okay, so that's the user setup. Pretty straightforward, but it's the first step that you have to do when, I guess, setting up a new user on the system. And of course, if you need to maintain a user, you can just go back into the card and change some of the information. The only thing that you can't change, and maybe I'll just, hop back to the system really briefly here, switch back. You can see that Jaylene's name is now grayed. Once a user has been created on the system, that's really the only thing you can't change is the user code. So if Jaylene wasn't happy with her user code, or for some reason we made a mistake, we'd have to lock this one down and create a new card. So that's the one thing that you kind of want to get right. But everything else can be sort of updated as you go. Okay. So we'll just quickly switch back to our PowerPoint here. So now the next stage in our kind of new user setup is to assign that user a license. And where we're going to find that again, of course, is in the administration module, but instead of going to the setup menu, there's actually a high level menu called license, and then license administration. And then this dialog box should come up. Okay, so let's take a look at that in the full system. So we're done with our user setup window. We can cancel that for now. I'll go into administration, I'll go into license, and I'll go into license admin. Okay, and license admin a little bit in the last couple versions of SAP Business One. You're always logged into the first sort of default tab, which is the main allocation window for the licenses. But you can also see that there are a couple of other tabs, and this assignment tab, I think, is one of the newer tabs. So if you click on the components, these are the things that you're licensed for. So things like professional user, limited user, indirect user, these are all purchased license types. Some of these other license components are license components that SAP creates that sort of runs background processes. So compatibility for add-ons, and you can see, you've got a total of 99999. Again, these profiles, these license profiles were created to kind of run other things as SAP had a need, but I just wanted to explain what they were because you will see them come up in the license allocations window. The last tab will actually show you who on the system, so what user codes are assigned what licenses. So there's a scroll bar. We're not seeing all users on the system now, but we can see that there's a total assigned for professional and a total free. So we've got one assigned and one free. We've got one CRM assigned, one limited financials, one logistics, one indirect access. So these are the number of free licenses that we have on the system. One free professional, one free indirect access user. So we're going to set up Jaylene as a professional user today because she's going to fill in for some things while, let's say, Martin's away. All right, so we'll go back to the allocation. You can see the company we're logged in as OEC Computers and the license is global. So we're going to find Jaylene's name in the list here. Should be alphabetical. Now, if you ever encounter a name that's grayed out, like the manager, because we're logged in as manager, it might mean that you can't add and take away. Manager's a little bit of a different case because it's a profile created specially for doing things by your consultant or your power user in Business One. But any of these other users, if they were grayed out, we may be blocked from actually unallocating or allocating licenses. So that's the gray thing. Those are your logged in users. So that's a good way to find who's logged into the system and who to boot out if you're needing to make changes. So we'll click on Jaylene's name, and as I said, we're going to set her up as a professional user. Now there's these other license types. So we don't have any of these to assign. We've got one indirect access. We don't need that one. And then there's these other license types like SAP Addons, Workflow, SDK. These are normally not required, but a good clue as to whether you should check this box or not, particularly this one called SAP Addons, is go to another one of the users in the system that sort of have a similar level of access and just see what's checked on their profile. And we can see that here, the SAP Addons, the Workflow, and the B1I, the SDK. I'll let you in on a little secret. The SDK is typically not something that people need to access. That's the software development kit. But if things like the B1I, the Workflow, and especially the SAP Addons is checked, we may want to check them off for Jaylene as well, just to make sure she's got access to the things that she needs access to. And that's why there's a whole bunch of these. They're sort of just spare. They're meant for things that SAP's kind of created along the way, data connections or what have you. Okay, so we'll click update there. All right, so now Jaylene's been assigned a professional user license. So if we go here into license assignment, we can see that the total professional users assigned is now 2, and we've got none free. And if we scroll through the list, we should be able to see a check mark by exactly who they're assigned to. So this is a nice tool. This came, I can't remember if it came around 9.1 patch level something or 9.2, but this is a very nice feature because it now enables you to do a bit more of an audit on who's using what license. And it's a little more visual, whereas before you sort of had to hunt through the individual profiles to do that. So that's a nice thing. Now, one other thing when it comes to license administration, and I'm not going to be exhaustive about this, but some of you run add-ons like BOEM B1 usability package or Course Suite country package, or you might even be running an add-on like Airless Job or Veritek or what have you. There will typically be a secondary assignment for those add-on licenses, and it'll usually be in the add-on folder. Not always, but usually. So if you go into your add-ons folder, and again, you typically just have access to this if you're an administrator on the system. We're running BOEM B1 usability package, and the manager user that I'm logged in at currently has a BOEM license assigned. But when I create Jaylene, in order for her to be able to run that BOEM add-on or that Airless or that Veritek or whatever, you'll typically have to assign the secondary license. So in this case, I know that BOEM's folder is in the add-ons folder. It's in usability package, and you can see there's a license admin. This is going to be a little bit different for every one of the add-ons, but I wanted to mention it just in case, you know, you're creating a profile for somebody and you're like, oh, why does that BOEM stuff not work for such and such? So in this case, you know, BOEM's got its own license admin screen. We can actually see that Jason Butler, the manager, has a license assigned for B1 usability package, and then we're just going to go and we're going to tick Jaylene's name. So I did BOEM today because it's one of the most common add-ons that people run. For those of you running Course Suite country package, this is going to be a similar thing. You're probably going to find the Course Suite license administration menu somewhere in the add-ons folder, but just a good thing to remember if you're creating that user profile. Okay, great. Any questions so far? I think, Jaylene?
Nope, none at this point, Rob.
All right, it's pretty straightforward stuff, but it's nice to have a guide like this to be able to refer back to, because like user and license administration isn't necessarily something that everybody does every day. So it can be tricky to remember, okay, where is everything? The last thing, so now we've set up a user card for Jaylene. We've given her a pro license and a BOEM license. What do we need to do now? We have to make sure that her authorization level is set on the system. So where are we going to find that? We're actually going to find that in a slightly different menu: administration, system initialization, authorizations, and general authorizations. All right. So we'll hop back to our demo system. And again, starting at the administration module. So the people who have access to this module would definitely be controlled by the module that we're just about to look into. System initialization folder, authorizations folder, and the general authorization screen. And when I click on that, I'm going to get that world famous authorization screen. I'll just drag it a little bit bigger. And again, a list of users on the left-hand side. And if I click on the manager user, the authorizations are all in gray. And that's because, again, I'm the manager and I'm the one logged in. So I can't actually change my authorization level while I'm logged in. So the manager user has full authorization to everything. Let's just click on Jaylene's profile over here. So the default level of authorization, you can see that on the general area, Jaylene came with a few default authorizations like here, but by and large, the profile is not given any authorizations off the hop. So that's another good question, you know, to ask yourself. Or here's another thing that kind of trips people up. It's like, I created the user card, I signed the license. Why can't I do anything? You know, why is there a red bar at the bottom that's throwing an error that says, you know, not allowed to access this type of error. It's because no authorizations have been assigned. So if what I want to do is make Jaylene's level of authorization just like, say, Sophie's level of authorization, and you can see Sophie has like full authorization to most, or let's say we've actually gone through these authorizations like we have for Michael, and we've sort of specified very particularly, Michael's got full for this, but none for that, and various for that. Usually there's three choices: either full authorization, so read and write access to a module, read-only access to a module, or no authorization. Those are the three choices. And in Michael's case, you can see that there's been a lot of authorization set by hand, and we only want to really have to do that once. So what we'll do is, because Jaylene gets to have the same authorizations as Michael, we can do one of a few things. We can actually take, so point, click, and hold with your right mouse button on Michael's name and drag it up to Jaylene, and then release. And then it'll ask you, do you want to apply Michael's authorizations to Jaylene I? And you can just say yes, and then Jaylene will have the same level of authorization. So if we look at Michael, there it is. If we look at Jaylene, there it is. Or another way to do it is, let's click on Sophie. Oh, bad example. Sophie must be logged in somewhere. Let's look at Maria. We can also use this copy authorizations button. So if we wanted to take Maria's authorizations and actually copy it to a whole bunch of people at once, we could do that by checking the names in this list. So let's say we wanted to apply to Jaylene and Fred all at the same time. And then we'll say, okay, do you want to apply Maria's authorization to these selected users? Yep, we're okay with that. So there you go. So that's another way. Another way to impact Jaylene's authorizations, other than copying them over like this or doing them by hand, is at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see there's a few buttons: full authorization to everything, read only, or none. So if we said read only, it would actually change Jaylene's authorization to read only for everything. Or if Jaylene was essentially a core user and needed full authorization to everything, we could just click the full button and away you go. Okay. One last thing to make life more fun and easy. So you can see there's two tabs here. So these are all of the user authorizations. These are actually authorization groups. So here's where we can set up authorization groups. So finance, sales, purchase, inventory. Let's say we wanted to set up an authorization group for shipping, receiving. We'll just call it shipping. I believe where we would go for that is the same folder as the general authorizations window comes up in. You can see this authorization groups. We're just going to create a group here. We're going to call it shipping. Call it shipping. And this is a long description. So the name was a short description. The long description can be shipping, receiving, auth. Okay, and we'll add. And you can see from this authorization groups window, we can actually also even choose users that participate in that group. So there's a couple of ways in which we can get users into the group. One of the ways, of course, was that user card itself. So we can say for this user, they're in that shipping group and select it. Okay, or we can do it here. All right, you can see the workflow users put in that group. Now, the other thing that we can do, and we'll probably have to reload the screen quick to see our group pop up again. Let's just see if switching tabs does it. Hooray. All right, if we click on that shipping group, we can now go in and by hand say, okay, shipping has access to this, but not this. We could say that shipping has the ability to do full or authorized on goods receipt POs, but they don't do AP invoices. That's an accounting function, but they could read only on AP invoice just to see if accounting had done that already. Okay, so we can go through and we can detail that. Then that means that any user in that user role be it new users or whatever. It just makes it easier to maintain user authorization levels based on a job role. So that's nice. Now, the other thing to bear in mind too is that access to modules will always be governed on the level of license that you have. So if you click full authorization on everything, that user will have full authorization, assuming that they've got a professional user license. If somebody that I've set up in the shipping group has a limited logistics license and I try to give them authorization to the AR invoice, they're not actually going to be able to access the AR invoice because the AR invoice is a document that you're not allowed to access, I think, in limited logistics. That might be wrong, actually. I know for a fact, however, that limited logistics can access the sales quotation. So that's maybe a better example. Somebody's going to call me out on that. But sales quotation is a limited CRM thing. So even if I gave the shipping profile access to the sales quotation, I wouldn't be able to access it with a limited logistics, if that makes sense. All right, so those are the authorizations. So Jaylene had a user card set up for her. We gave her an SAP license and a BOEM license, and we've also given her full access to the system. So that means if I go into my administration module and I hit choose company, and I'm in the OEC computers demo database, I'll hit this button for change user, and I'll put Jaylene I, and I'll put that temporary welcome password. So we're just sort of supposing this is Jaylene logging in for the first time. And you can see that it prompts Jaylene to change the password. So we'll put the old temp password in first, and then we'll put a super secret password of 1234. So we're good with passwords here that way. We'll hit update. So we've given Jaylene her log information, her code, and the temp password. She's been able to log in and change the password for the first time. And you can see that SAP is just relogging into the same company under a new profile. In the bottom menu bar, that BOEM add-on is restarting. So just have to wait a couple of moments for that to happen. But once those things happen, then Jaylene should be logged into the system and ready to work. Okay, so that's really the substance of today's webinar, kind of creating new user cards, assigning licenses, and giving authorization. Right, and the one thing that happens, of course, when users log into the first time, they usually get a fancy welcome screen like this. We'll just disagree to participate in that program. But if we were to test Jaylene's profile now, and we go ahead and click on that, you can see she's got access to what she needs access to. Okay. All right, so that's pretty much it for the webinar content. We'll take questions now. Just Thanks, remembering Rob. Those 3 steps. Yep.
So again, if you have questions, you can just type them into that questions panel on the right side of your screen, and we'll let Rob answer those. In the meantime, I just want to make a note that we did record today's session, so you'll all be getting an email tomorrow with a link to that recording. It'll be up on our website, so it'll be easy for you to reference back to if you need in the future. So
one of the things I'll mention, Jaylene, for the people in attendance, if you buy a new license, a new SAP license from Project Line, we'll usually do the installation of the license key for you as part of the purchase of the new license, and even assign the license while we're putting the license key in. We'll typically ask you to create the user card on your own and kind of assign the authorizations out, because that's sort of more the function for our clients. But if you bought a new pro user license for a new employee that's starting, we'll usually help you out, because a new license key file will be generated. We'll install that license key as part of the new license purchase process, and we'll even apply the license against the user that you set up.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob.
Kind of included. Yeah.
So it doesn't look like we have any questions. If you do have questions after today's session, feel free to reach out to either Rob or Jerwin as your relationship managers. They're here to help. So I think that is all we have for today. I want to thank Rob for a great session, and thank you to everyone for attending.